In the late 1970s, music was splitting in two. On one side, you had the Bee Gees, three brothers who dressed in silk, sang in high falsetto voices, and owned the radio with songs like Stayin' Alive and Night Fever. They were everywhere. Disco clubs lived on their sound. The movie Saturday Night Fever made them the face of an entire generation of dance music. But not everyone loved them. In London, another sound was rising. Loud, messy, and full of anger. It was punk, and leading the charge was a sneering young man named Johnny Rotten, singer of the Sex Pistols. To him, disco wasn't joyful, it wasn't free, it was fake, and he had one target that summed it all up: the Bee Gees. One day, Johnny Rotten was asked about the music ruling the charts. He rolled his eyes and spat out three sharp words about the Bee Gees. He called them boring plastic pop. It was a line that got printed in newspapers, a line that would follow the Bee Gees for years. And soon fans and magazines started whispering. Robin Gibb had hit back. Did he really? Or was the so-called war between Johnny Rotten and Robin Gibb more myth than truth? This is the story of a clash that may never have truly happened, but still shaped how we remember disco and punk. Before we dive deeper into this strange war between Robin Gibb and Johnny Rotten, make sure you hit subscribe to RetroWaves. Here we bring back the hidden stories, the rivalries, and the moments you never forgot, or maybe never knew at all. If you love music history told the way it really felt, you'll feel right at home here. Johnny Rotten was not known for holding back. He insulted the Queen, the government, and just about every pop act that filled the charts. His band, the Sex Pistols, had been created to shake up polite society. Their whole image was based on being rude, angry, and shocking. So when he called the Bee Gees boring plastic pop, it wasn't just a stray insult, it was part of punk's entire mission. Punk saw disco and pop as fake, shiny distractions. Music made to sell records, not to tell the truth. And the Bee Gees, whether they liked it or not, were the perfect target. They were polished, they were global stars, they were tied to a movie that represented everything punk despised: glamorous nightlife, expensive clothes, people dancing instead of fighting back. To Rotten, the Bee Gees weren't just another band. They were the face of a culture that had no connection to the rage of Britain's youth. Magazines jumped on his line. Rock papers loved to pit artists against one another. They splashed headlines about Rotten versus Robin. They asked the Bee Gees if they cared about punk's insults. Even when the brothers stayed quiet, the press kept stirring the pot. Soon, the idea spread. Robin Gibb had fired back. Here's the strange thing. If you search through real interviews, you won't find Robin Gibb calling punk a fad. There's no hard proof he said it. But in the late 70s, gossip worked differently. All it took was one magazine to print a rumor, and suddenly it became fact. Fans whispered it to one another. Writers repeated it in columns. The more it was repeated, the more people believed it. So when some papers hinted that Robin thought punk wouldn't last, many took it as true. The story grew legs. Suddenly it wasn't just Rotten mocking disco. Now it was Robin mocking punk. The truth? Robin rarely wasted his breath on insults. He could be blunt, yes. Years later, he even admitted he thought the Saturday Night Fever film was awful. But about punk, nothing clear survives on record. Still, his supposed words, "Punk is just a fad," were enough to spark a myth. And for punk fans, it was enough to hate the Bee Gees even more. By 1978, it wasn't just a music debate, it was war on the streets. Punk kids spat at disco fans. Disco fans rolled their eyes at punk's anger. Clubs turned into battle zones of style. One side wore leather, chains, and spiked hair. The other wore open shirts, gold chains, and platform shoes. To punk kids, disco was soulless. To disco lovers, punk was just noise. And in the middle sat two names, Johnny Rotten and Robin Gibb. Rotten became the voice of the outcasts, the poor, the young who felt ignored. His insults summed up their feelings. Why should anyone care about three brothers singing about night fever while factories closed and jobs disappeared? Robin, on the other hand, stood for the dream of escape. His voice, soaring in falsetto, gave people a chance to forget real life for a while. For him and his brothers, music was joy. Neither man asked to become a symbol, but the press made it so. Rotten versus Robin became disco versus punk. Every club, every radio station, every youth group picked a side, and the more fans argued, the bigger the feud became, whether it was real or not. Once Johnny Rotten threw out the line, "boring plastic pop," the press did what it always does. It smelled blood. Music magazines in the late 1970s loved drama. Rivalry sold copies. Fights between artists gave reporters easy headlines, and the supposed clash between Johnny Rotten and Robin Gibb was too good to ignore. Soon, newspapers ran stories hinting at a war of words. They asked Robin what he thought of punk. If he gave no answer, they filled the silence with guesses. Some wrote that he called punk just noise. Others claimed he laughed off Rotten as nothing more than cheap publicity. None of it was confirmed, but the stories kept running. Fans believed what they read. Punk kids took it as proof that Robin looked down on them. Disco fans repeated the idea that punk wouldn't last. The more it spread, the more it seemed like both sides were throwing punches. The truth was more boring. Robin didn't seem to care. He had bigger things to worry about: stadium tours, writing new songs, and surviving the pressure of fame. For him, punk was not a threat. It was just another sound, like heavy metal or glam rock. But the press didn't want the truth. It wanted a war. And so, the battle between Robin and Rotten lived on in headlines, even if neither man said much about it. What the press created, fans made real. By 1979, the tension between disco and punk was everywhere, and it wasn't just about music. It was about class, culture, and identity. In America, the most dramatic moment came at a baseball game in Chicago. On July 12, 1979, a radio DJ who hated disco organized a stunt called Disco Demolition Night. Fans brought disco records to the stadium. Between games, a crate full of Bee Gees albums and other disco hits was blown up on the field. The explosion was followed by chaos. Fans stormed the grass. The second game had to be canceled. For many, that night symbolized the death of disco. To punk and rock fans, it was proof that people were tired of fake glamour. To disco lovers, it was nothing but hate, a violent rejection of joy, dance, and freedom. The Bee Gees, of course, became the face of that backlash. They hadn't planned it. They hadn't asked for it. But their success made them an easy target. In Britain, the same energy played out in smaller ways. Punk kids mocked disco's bright shirts and mirror balls. Disco fans mocked punk's torn clothes and safety pins. Fistfights broke out outside clubs. Whole groups of friends split apart because of music taste. And hanging over it all was that simple insult, boring plastic pop. Rotten's line had become a slogan. It wasn't just about the Bee Gees anymore. It was about everything disco stood for. Even as the war heated up, Robin Gibb himself stayed mostly silent. But silence can sometimes speak louder than words. Fans invented their own answers. Some claimed Robin once dismissed punk as three-chord nonsense. Others swore he said it was just a passing fad. Whether true or not, those rumors gave the press more fuel. Robin's quietness was often taken as arrogance. If he didn't reply to Rotten, maybe it was because he thought punk wasn't worth his time. If he didn't fight back, maybe it meant he agreed punk was beneath him. But there's another way to see it. Maybe Robin understood what Rotten really wanted: attention. By ignoring him, Robin avoided giving the Sex Pistols free publicity. After all, while Rotten mocked, the Bee Gees sold millions. Still, that didn't stop fans and reporters from keeping the story alive. And with each retelling, the feud grew bigger. What started as one throwaway line turned into a cultural legend. The Bee Gees and the Sex Pistols were never truly enemies. They never met on stage, never fought in person, never traded insults directly, but the world made them symbols. Rotten became the voice of those who wanted truth, raw, unpolished, and angry. Robin became the voice of those who wanted escape, light, beauty, and joy. It wasn't really about two men. It was about what music meant in a time of deep change. Britain was struggling with unemployment and strikes. America was battling inflation and fear. People needed an outlet. Some found it in disco, others in punk. And so, the supposed war between Rotten and Robin became much bigger than either man. It became a story about the late 1970s themselves, a time when music was more than music. It was identity. By the early 1980s, the dust from the so-called war between Robin Gibb and Johnny Rotten had settled, but the scars it left on both sides were clear. The Sex Pistols had already burned themselves out. Their time as a band had lasted less than 3 chaotic years. They had released just one proper studio album, Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. And yet their impact was enormous. They had terrified governments, outraged parents, and inspired kids everywhere to pick up guitars even if they couldn't play them. But by 1978, the band was finished. Their last US tour had been a disaster. Johnny Rotten himself ended the final show with the now famous words, "Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?" It wasn't just a line to the audience, it was how he felt about the whole ride. In less than 3 years, punk's brightest flame had gone out. The Bee Gees, on the other hand, were still everywhere. In 1978, they had dominated the Billboard charts like no one else. They had 6 consecutive #1 hits in the US. Songs like Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, and Too Much Heaven were more than music. They were cultural landmarks. But by 1979, the disco backlash came crashing down. Radio stations started cutting disco from their playlists. Critics began to mock the Bee Gees as overexposed. And then came the most symbolic moment of all, Disco Demolition Night. At Chicago's Comiskey Park, disco records were blown up in the middle of a baseball game. Fans stormed the field. Bee Gees albums were smashed, burned, and shredded. It didn't matter that the brothers weren't even present. To the angry crowd, the Bee Gees were disco, and disco had to die. Suddenly, Robin and his brothers found themselves on the defensive. For years, they had ruled the airwaves. Now they were being treated as punchlines. Some rock critics wrote that Johnny Rotten had been right all along. Disco was plastic, and it had finally collapsed. But here's the twist. Disco never truly died. Its rhythms lived on in dance music, in hip-hop samples, even in electronic music decades later. And the Bee Gees didn't vanish either. They adapted. They began writing hit songs for other artists. Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, Dionne Warwick. Even in the middle of the backlash, their melodies kept shaping pop music. The so-called war between Robin and Rotten was never a real war, but fans remembered it as if it predicted what came next. Punk burning out, disco falling out of fashion. To many, that insult, boring plastic pop, became the headline that summed up the end of the 1970s. Even as both scenes faded, the rumors about Robin's supposed response refused to disappear. Did Robin Gibb really call punk a fad? Some fans swear he did. They claim he once told a reporter punk would blow over like a fashion trend. Others say he dismissed it as music for kids who can't play. But no reliable tape, no written interview, no confirmed source has ever surfaced. The evidence is missing. What we have instead are whispers, a story repeated so many times that it became accepted as fact, even without proof. In the 1980s, when Robin spoke to journalists, he rarely mentioned punk at all. He cared more about songwriting, about family, and yet magazines and books kept bringing it up. A feud sells. A feud gives people something to argue about. So the story lived on, even if it wasn't real. By the 1990s, as nostalgia for the 1970s grew, the Rotten versus Robin tale began appearing in documentaries. Punk historians loved quoting Rotten's insult. Bee Gees fans, meanwhile, often defended Robin, saying the brothers were too professional to bother with a reply. The contrast only made the myth stronger. And so, a strange thing happened. Whether Robin ever said anything or not no longer mattered. What mattered was that people believed he did. As time passed, the two men at the center of the story grew older, and their lives went in very different directions. Johnny Rotten, who had once spat on every institution, surprised many by reinventing himself. He founded Public Image Limited, a band that mixed punk with experimental sounds. He shocked critics by showing he was more than a one-note rebel. Later, he became known for something even more personal, his devotion to his wife Nora. When she developed Alzheimer's disease, Rotten became her caretaker, speaking openly about her struggles with tenderness and love. For a man once seen as the face of chaos, it was a softer, more human side. Robin Gibb, meanwhile, continued to write and perform with his brothers. The Bee Gees had their ups and downs in the 1980s, but they always found a way back. They earned respect as not just singers, but as some of the greatest songwriters of all time. But Robin's life, too, was marked by loss. His younger brother Andy died in 1988 at just 30 years old. His twin Morris passed away in 2003, and in 2012, Robin himself lost his battle with cancer. By then only Barry remained, the last Bee Gee standing. In their final years, both men were remembered for very different reasons. Rotten as a rebel who never softened his words, Robin as a voice that carried the beauty of pop into millions of lives. The feud between them was hardly mentioned, but for fans, it was never forgotten. So what do we make of it now? Johnny Rotten's insult still appears in books about punk. It is often quoted as one of the most cutting put-downs of the disco era. In just 3 words, boring plastic pop, he captured the anger of an entire generation. Robin's reply? That part remains a mystery. Maybe he said it, maybe he didn't, maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is the way fans used it. To punk kids, it was proof that the Bee Gees looked down on them. To disco fans, it was proof that punk really was just a passing phase. In truth, both sides got it wrong. Punk never fully died. Disco never truly disappeared. Both continued to influence music for decades. Today, punk is celebrated for its honesty, its raw spirit. Disco is loved for its joy, its energy, its ability to make people move. And that's why the Rotten versus Robin story still fascinates us. Not because it was real, but because it symbolized something bigger. It wasn't about 2 men trading insults. It was about 2 worlds colliding. Rebellion versus escape, anger versus beauty. When we look back, it's hard not to wonder, did Rotten really mean it? Did Robin really dismiss punk? Or was it just the press, fanning the flames for headlines? Maybe it doesn't matter, because in the end, this war tells us something about music itself. Music isn't just about sound, it's about belonging. It's about how we see ourselves. For some, the Bee Gees gave comfort, a chance to forget hard times and lose themselves on the dance floor. For others, the Sex Pistols gave a voice, a way to shout against a system that felt broken. And though the feud may have been built on rumor, it lives on, because it reflects something true. Music is powerful. It can divide us, it can unite us, and it can turn even the smallest insult into a legend that lasts forever. So maybe the real question isn't whether Rotten or Robin was right. The question is, what did their music mean to you? Because whether you were in a disco club under the lights or in a dark room screaming along with punk, their voices, both of them, are still echoing today.